What would you do if you discovered that your entire marriage was built on a lie? That the man you've shared your bed with for 28 years has been living a double life? Today, I'm going to tell you about Margaret, a 58-year-old grandmother from Ohio whose world came crashing down with a single phone call on a Tuesday morning. But here's the thing. What happened next will restore your faith in the strength of the human spirit. If you've ever felt like your life was falling apart, or if you've ever wondered if it's too late to start over, you need to hear Margaret's story. Trust me, you won't see the ending coming.
Let me paint you a picture of Margaret's life before that phone call. Picture this: a beautiful colonial house in suburban Cleveland with a white picket fence that she painted herself every spring. The house sat on Maple Street, one of those tree-lined neighborhoods where everyone waves from their front porches and knows each other's business. Margaret had what everyone thought was the perfect life. She'd been married to Robert for 28 years. They met when she was just 29, working as a receptionist at a law firm downtown. Robert was the charming insurance agent who came in every week, always with a smile and a compliment about her hair or her dress. He was the kind of man who opened doors, who brought flowers on their third date, who proposed under the Christmas tree in her parents' living room. They had two wonderful children, Sarah, now 30, working as a teacher in California with two kids of her own, and Michael, 26, who'd just gotten engaged to his college sweetheart, Emma. Margaret's refrigerator was covered with photos of graduations, birthday parties, family vacations to Disney World and the Grand Canyon. Margaret's days had a rhythm, a comfortable predictability that she'd built over nearly 3 decades. She volunteered at the local library every Tuesday and Thursday morning, reading to children during story time. She was the kind of volunteer who remembered every child's name, who knew which ones needed extra attention, who always had Band-Aids in her purse for scraped knees. Her afternoons were spent in her garden, her pride and joy. She'd won the neighborhood gardening contest 3 years running with her prize-winning roses and her vegetable patch that produced enough tomatoes to share with half the street. Neighbors would stop by just to admire her flowers and ask for gardening advice. Every Thursday evening, her living room transformed into book club central. For 8 years, the same 6 women had gathered around her coffee table, sipping wine, and discussing the latest bestseller. Margaret always provided homemade cookies and made sure everyone felt heard. She was the glue that held the group together. She was the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, who showed up with casseroles when neighbors were sick, who organized the annual block party and somehow made it look effortless. Her calendar was color-coded: blue for Robert's work events, green for family obligations, pink for her volunteer work. But here's what you need to understand about Margaret, and maybe you'll see yourself in this. Somewhere along the way, she had started feeling invisible. You know that feeling, don't you? When you're in your late 50s and you catch a glimpse of yourself in the mirror and wonder when you became your mother? It started small. Robert barely looked up from his phone during dinner anymore. When she tried to tell him about her day, about the funny thing that happened at the library or the new recipe she'd tried, he would nod absently and say, "Uh-huh," without really listening.
Their conversations had become purely logistical. Who's picking up groceries? When is the next mortgage payment due? Did you remember to call the plumber about that dripping faucet? When was the last time he'd asked her about her dreams, her thoughts, her feelings about anything that mattered? She remembered the exact moment she realized how invisible she'd become. They were at Michael's engagement party 6 months earlier, surrounded by family and friends. Robert was telling a story about their early dating days, but in his version, Margaret was just a prop, the pretty girl who laughed at his jokes. He didn't mention how she'd encouraged him to start his own insurance agency, how she'd worked nights doing bookkeeping for other small businesses to help pay for his business license, how she'd been his partner in building the life they now lived. That night, lying in bed next to Robert as he scrolled through his phone, Margaret had whispered, "Do you still see me?" Robert had looked up briefly and said, "Of course I see you, Maggie, you're right there." But he'd completely missed the point. She wasn't asking if he could physically see her. She was asking if he still saw her as a woman, as a person with her own thoughts and dreams and desires. She was asking if she still mattered to him as anything more than the person who kept his life organized and his house clean. Margaret told herself this was normal. This is what happens after 28 years of marriage. The passion fades, but the security remains. The butterfly feelings are replaced by comfortable routine. She'd made her peace with it, convinced herself that wanting more was selfish, unrealistic. She had a beautiful home, healthy children, financial security. What more could she want? What right did she have to feel restless, unfulfilled, invisible? But late at night, when Robert was snoring beside her and the house was quiet, Margaret would sometimes lie awake and wonder, is this it? Is this all there is? Had she traded her dreams for security, her identity for stability? Or so she thought she'd made her peace with it. Some part of her, a part she'd buried deep down, was still waiting, still hoping, still believing that maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than this comfortable, predictable existence. She had no idea that everything was about to change.
It was Tuesday, October 15th, 2024, at exactly 10:47 in the morning. Margaret remembers the exact time because she was watching the clock, timing the coffee cake in the oven. It was Robert's favorite, cinnamon streusel with the special vanilla glaze he loved. She was making it for his office party that afternoon, the same party she'd been making treats for every year for the past decade. Margaret was humming along to an old song on the radio, feeling unusually cheerful. The October sun was streaming through her kitchen windows, casting golden light on the granite countertops that she and Robert had picked out together 5 years ago during their kitchen renovation. She remembered how they disagreed about the color. She'd wanted the warm honey granite, he'd preferred the stark white marble. They'd compromised, and now she wondered if that's all their marriage had become. One long series of compromises where she always gave in. When the phone rang, she almost didn't answer. A noon number, probably a telemarketer. But something, maybe intuition, maybe fate, made her wipe her flour-dusted hands on her apron and pick up the cordless phone. "Hello? Is this Margaret Henderson?" The voice belonged to a woman, definitely younger than her, maybe in her 30s. There was something in her tone, nervous but determined, like someone who'd been practicing this conversation in her head for days. "Yes, this is Margaret. Can I help you?" There was a pause, and Margaret could hear the woman take a shaky breath. "Mrs. Henderson, my name is Jessica Morrison. I'm not sure how to say this, but I need to tell you something about your husband." Margaret's first thought was that Robert had been in an accident. Her mind immediately went to worst-case scenarios. A car crash, a heart attack, some terrible tragedy that would explain why a stranger was calling her instead of a hospital or police officer. Her heart started racing, and she gripped the phone tighter. "Is Robert okay? Has something happened to him? Is he hurt?" There was another long pause, longer this time, and Margaret could hear what sounded like traffic in the background. Jessica was calling from outside somewhere, maybe from a parking lot or a street corner. "No, Mrs. Henderson, he's not hurt. He's... God, this is so hard to say. Mrs. Henderson, Robert and we've been together for 7 years. We have a relationship, and I'm pregnant with his child." The words hit Margaret like ice water. For a moment, she couldn't process what she'd heard. It was like her brain refused to translate the sounds into meaning. "I'm sorry, what did you say?" "Mrs. Henderson, I'm so sorry to have to tell you this way, but Robert and I have been seeing each other for 7 years. I'm 4 months pregnant, and the baby is his."
Margaret's legs gave out completely. She slumped into the kitchen chair, the one with the loose leg that wobbled whenever she sat down, the one Robert kept promising to fix but never did. The irony wasn't lost on her even in that moment. That's impossible," Margaret whispered, her voice barely audible. "Robert comes home every night. We have dinner together at 6:30, we watch the news, we go to bed at the same time. He wouldn't." "The business trips," Jessica interrupted gently, and there was genuine kindness in her voice, which somehow made everything worse.
All those insurance conferences and client meetings. He told me you knew about us, Mrs. Henderson. He said you were okay with it, that you had some kind of arrangement, that you preferred it this way because it took the pressure off your marriage. Margaret felt like she was drowning. Business trips. Yes, Robert traveled for work, maybe once or twice a month, sometimes more during busy seasons. He'd been doing it for years. It was part of his job as a regional insurance manager. She'd never questioned it. Why would she? But yesterday, Jessica continued, her voice getting shakier, I was at Target and I saw Robert with another woman. A different woman. They were holding hands, looking at furniture together. When I confronted him about it later, he got angry. He told me I was being paranoid. But I kept pushing, and finally, he told me the truth. That you don't know about me. That you don't know about any of us. Any of us. Those 3 words hit Margaret like a physical blow. The kitchen seemed to tilt around her, and she had to grip the edge of the table to keep from falling off the chair. Any of you? She managed to whisper. Mrs. Henderson, I am so sorry. For 7 years, I thought you knew. I thought you were okay with it. I would never have, if I'd known you didn't know. Jessica's voice broke, and Margaret realized the younger woman was crying. Margaret stared at the coffee cake timer on the stove. 12 minutes left. In 12 minutes, she would need to take Robert's favorite coffee cake out of the oven, let it cool, and drizzle it with vanilla glaze. In 12 minutes, her old life would still be intact, and she could pretend this phone call had never happened. But she couldn't pretend, not anymore. How long did you say? Margaret asked, surprised by how calm her voice sounded. 7 years, Jessica whispered. Our anniversary is next month, November 12th, the day he told me he'd finally found the courage to tell you about us. November 12th. Margaret's mind raced. 7 years ago. What had been happening 7 years ago? Sarah had just graduated college. Michael was in his sophomore year. Margaret had been... God, she'd been planning their 20th anniversary party for Robert. She'd spent months organizing a surprise party for Robert, inviting all their friends and family, booking the banquet hall at their country club. She remembered that anniversary party so clearly. Robert had seemed distracted that night, kept checking his phone. She'd attributed it to work stress. Now she realized he'd probably been texting Jessica, maybe even sneaking away to call her. While Margaret was celebrating 20 years of marriage, Robert was already 1 year into a relationship with another woman. Mrs. Henderson, are you still there? I'm here, Margaret said quietly. The timer was down to 8 minutes now. I want you to know, Jessica continued, that I'm leaving him. As soon as I found out you didn't know, I ended it. I may be a lot of things, but I'm not a homewrecker. I thought I was in a relationship with a man who was honest with his wife. I never wanted to hurt you. Margaret almost laughed. Not a homewrecker. The home had been wrecked 7 years ago. Margaret just hadn't known it.
What happened next would make your blood boil. But it would also show you just how strong a woman can be when she's pushed to her breaking point. Margaret hung up the phone with Jessica and sat in her kitchen for exactly 17 minutes, watching the timer count down. When it finally buzzed, she got up like she was in a trance, took out the coffee cake, and set it on the cooling rack. The smell that usually brought her so much joy, cinnamon and vanilla and butter, now made her feel sick. Then she did what any of us might do in that situation. She called Robert immediately. His secretary, Linda, answered cheerfully. Henderson Insurance, this is Linda. How can I help you? Linda, it's Margaret. I need to speak to Robert right now. Oh, hi, Margaret. He's in a client meeting, but I can have him call you back in about an hour. Linda, Margaret's voice was steel. Get him out of that meeting. Tell him his wife called and he needs to come home immediately. Tell him it's an emergency. There must have been something in Margaret's tone because Linda didn't argue. Of course, Margaret. I'll get him right away. Robert came on the line 30 seconds later, and Margaret could hear the concern in his voice. Or maybe it was fear. Looking back, it was probably fear. Maggie? Honey, what's wrong? Are you hurt? Are the kids okay? For 28 years, Margaret had been the kind of wife who smoothed things over, who made problems disappear before they could upset Robert. She was the one who handled difficult neighbors, school issues with the kids, problems with contractors. Robert's life was deliberately kept calm and simple because Margaret absorbed all the chaos. But not today. Robert, come. Home now. But honey, I really can't leave right now. This client has been trying to get this meeting scheduled for weeks, and if I can just... Margaret hung up on him. She hung up on her husband for the first time in 28 years of marriage. 47 minutes later, she was still watching the clock obsessively. Robert's BMW pulled into their driveway. Margaret watched from the kitchen window as he sat in his car for a full minute before getting out. Even from a distance, she could see his hands shaking as he loosened his tie. She met him at the front door, and for the first time in years, she really looked at him. Robert was 59, still handsome in that silver fox way that had always made her friends a little envious. He kept himself in good shape, had excellent taste in clothes, and knew how to charm people. But now, seeing him through the lens of Jessica's phone call, Margaret noticed things she'd been blind to. The way he avoided direct eye contact when he was nervous, the way his jaw tightened when he was caught off guard, the subtle signs that he was lying, the slight shoulder shrug, the way he touched his neck.
"We need to talk," Margaret said, leading him to the dining room table, the same table where they'd celebrated 28 Christmases, 28 birthdays, 28 anniversaries. Robert sat down slowly, and his face went white as a sheet. He knew. He absolutely knew that his carefully constructed house of lies was about to come tumbling down. "Maggie, whatever this is about, I'm sure we can..." "Jessica called me today." The color drained completely from Robert's face. For a moment, he looked like he might be sick. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Jessica Morrison, pregnant with your child. 7 years, Robert. 7 years." What came next was a confession that lasted 3.5 hours. But Robert didn't confess willingly. Every detail had to be dragged out of him, piece by piece, lie by lie. It started with Jessica. Yes, they'd been together for 7 years. Yes, she was pregnant. Yes, he told her that Margaret knew about their relationship. "How could you do that?" Margaret asked. "How could you make me complicit in something I knew nothing about?" "I didn't want to hurt you," Robert said weakly. "So instead, you made a woman think I was okay with my husband cheating on me? You made her think I was some pathetic wife who just accepted being betrayed?" But Jessica wasn't the only one. There had been Linda before her, a 2-year relationship that ended when Linda moved to Phoenix. Before that, there had been countless one-night stands during business trips. Some of those insurance conferences weren't conferences at all. They were weekend getaways with women Robert had met online. Margaret made him go through the finances. There was a credit card she didn't know about, used for hotels and gifts and dinners with other women. Nearly $47,000 charged over the past 5 years. Money that could have paid for their daughter's wedding, or helped with their son's student loans, or funded the European trip Margaret had been dreaming about for years. "Where did you think I thought the money was going?" Margaret asked. "You never asked about the finances," Robert said defensively. "You were always happy to let me handle everything." That was true. Margaret had trusted him completely. She'd signed tax returns without reading them, let him manage their investments, never questioned his business expenses. She'd been proud of how well Robert provided for them, how he'd built his insurance business from nothing into something successful. Now she realized her trust had been his cover story. But here's the part that will shock you. It wasn't the affairs that broke Margaret's heart. It wasn't even the money or the lies. It was what Robert said when she asked him the question that had been haunting her for months. "Why, Robert? Why did you do this? What was missing in our marriage that made you need all these other women?"
Robert was quiet for a long time. Then he looked at her with something that might have been pity and said, "I felt trapped, Maggie. You stopped being interesting years ago. You became predictable. You were like a piece of furniture. Always there, always the same, never surprising me or challenging me or making me feel excited about coming home." Predictable. 28 years of loyalty, of love, of building a life together, of sacrificing her own dreams to support his, of making herself smaller so he could shine brighter, and she had become predictable. "So you decided to find excitement elsewhere," Margaret said quietly. "I never meant for it to go this far. It was supposed to be just fun. Something to make me feel alive again." "And what about making me feel alive, Robert? When was the last time you tried to make me feel alive?" Robert didn't have an answer for that. That night, after Robert packed a bag and left to stay with his brother, Margaret sat in her empty house and did something she hadn't done in years. She poured herself a large glass of wine, put on music that Robert always said was too loud, and she danced. She danced alone in her living room, crying and laughing and feeling more awake than she had in years. And then, at 11:47 p.m., Margaret made a decision that would surprise everyone who knew her. She decided to stop being predictable. She decided to stop being safe. She decided to live.
Now, I know what you're thinking. This is where Margaret falls apart, right? This is where she becomes bitter, where she lawyers up and fights for half of everything, where she spends the rest of her life telling anyone who listen about what a terrible man Robert is. But Margaret surprised everyone, including herself. The first thing she did the next morning was call her daughter Sarah in California. It was 6 a.m. Ohio time, which meant it was 3 a.m. in California, but Margaret didn't care. She needed to hear her daughter's voice. "Mom? Mom, what's wrong? Are you okay?" Margaret told Sarah everything, every detail, every affair, every lie. And Sarah's response wasn't what Margaret expected. "Mom, I'm so sorry, but I have to ask you something. Are you relieved?" "Relieved? Mom, you haven't sounded happy in years. When I call you, you sound like you're going through the motions, like you're sleepwalking through your own life." Sarah was right, and Margaret knew it. Somewhere along the way, she had stopped living and started just existing. The second thing Margaret did was look at herself, really look, in the full-length mirror in her bedroom. Yes, she had gray hair that she'd been meaning to color for months. Yes, she had wrinkles around her eyes and softness around her middle. But you know what else she saw? She saw a woman who had spent 28 years taking care of everyone else and had forgotten how to take care of herself. She saw a woman who had given up her own dreams to support someone else's, who had made herself smaller and quieter and more manageable year after year until she'd nearly disappeared entirely. But she also saw something she hadn't noticed in a long time: strength. In her eyes, in the set of her shoulders, in the way she stood a little straighter when she realized she was looking at a survivor. That afternoon, Margaret did something that shocked everyone who knew her. She walked into Antonio's, the fanciest salon in Cleveland, the one she'd driven past hundreds of times but never had the courage to enter because it looked too expensive, too trendy, too intimidating. She told the stylist, a young man named Marco with purple hair and kind eyes, "I want to look like someone who's done being invisible." Marco studied her face for a long moment, then smiled. "I know exactly what you need."
3 hours later, Margaret walked out with a chic, silver pixie cut that took 10 years off her appearance and made her cheekbones look like they belonged on a movie star. But more than that, she walked out feeling like herself for the first time in years. The transformation wasn't just physical. That night, Margaret did something she hadn't done since college.
She drove to Barnes & Noble and wandered the aisles, not looking for books for her book club or her volunteer work or something Robert might enjoy, but books that called to her. She left with 7 books: a travel guide to Italy, a biography of Georgia O'Keeffe, a novel about a woman who starts over at 50, 2 poetry collections, a cookbook focused on cooking for one, and a book about starting your own business. But the real awakening happened at book club that Thursday. Remember that book club Margaret hosted every Thursday? Well, it turns out that for the past 3 years, the ladies hadn't been discussing the books at all. Margaret had been so distracted by her own quiet desperation that she'd missed what was happening right in front of her. These women, her friends, had been slowly coming alive too, each in their own quiet way. Joyce, 62 and divorced for 5 years, had been secretly taking salsa dancing lessons at the community center. She'd been too embarrassed to tell anyone because she thought people would judge a woman her age for wanting to learn to dance. But Margaret, Joyce said, when I'm dancing, I feel like I'm 25 again. I feel beautiful and graceful and alive. Helen, 55, and married to a man who hadn't complimented her in a decade, had been writing romance novels under the pseudonym H.M. Sterling. Her first book had been published 6 months ago and was already a bestseller on Amazon. I've made more money in 6 months of writing than I made in 2 years at my part-time job at the department store, Helen confessed. But I was afraid to tell anyone because I thought people would think it was silly. Linda, 60 and widowed 3 years ago, had been learning Italian through an app on her phone. She'd already booked a trip to Tuscany for the following spring, something she and her late husband had always talked about doing someday. Life is too short for someday, Linda said quietly. I learned that when Jim died. All those plans we made, all those trips we postponed, all those dreams we put on hold for the right time. There is no right time. There's just now. And Beth, 58 and recently retired from teaching, had been taking art classes and had already had 3 paintings accepted into a local gallery show.
I haven't painted since high school, Beth admitted, but I walked past an art supply store 6 months ago and something just pulled me inside. I bought a set of watercolors on impulse, and now I can't imagine my life without painting. These women weren't just book club members. They were dreamers who had forgotten how to dream, who had been quietly coming back to life while everyone around them thought they were just housewives, just retirees, just women of a certain age who should be content with what they had. Margaret looked around her living room at these incredible women and realized something profound. They had all been hiding their true selves, just like she had. They had all been making themselves smaller, quieter, more appropriate for their age and station in life. You know what? Margaret said, setting down her wine glass. I think we need to stop hiding. That night, after everyone left, Margaret made a list. At 58 years old, sitting at her dining room table with a legal pad and a pen, Margaret made a list of everything she wanted to do that she'd been too scared, too busy, too responsible to try. Learn pottery, travel to Italy alone, try online dating, get a tattoo, take a cooking class, learn to tango, start a blog, go skydiving, take a photography workshop, learn to play the guitar she'd bought herself for Christmas 5 years ago and never touched. The list was 3 pages long. As she wrote, Margaret realized that somewhere in the process of becoming Robert's wife and Sarah and Michael's mother and the neighborhood's most reliable volunteer, she had lost track of who Margaret actually was underneath all those roles. For the first time in 28 years, she was about to find out.
What happened over the next 6 months will inspire you, especially if you've ever thought it was too late to reinvent yourself. First, Margaret signed up for a pottery class. Sounds simple, right? But when she sat at that wheel for the first time, her hands covered in clay, shaping something beautiful from nothing,
She cried. She cried because she remembered what it felt like to create something just for herself. Then, she did something that shocked everyone who knew her. She got a tattoo, a small sunflower on her wrist, because sunflowers always turn toward the light, no matter what. But here's where the story gets really good. Remember Jessica, the woman who called Margaret that Tuesday morning? Well, Jessica called again 3 weeks later. Mrs. Henderson, I just wanted to thank you. After our conversation, I realized I deserved better too. I broke up with Robert. I'm going to raise this baby on my own. Instead of hanging up, Margaret found herself saying, "Would you like to meet for coffee?" And that coffee meeting, it changed both of their lives. Jessica was 32, working 2 jobs to make ends meet, scared about being a single mother. Margaret was 58, starting over, terrified but exhilarated. They became unlikely friends. Margaret helped Jessica prepare for the baby. Jessica helped Margaret learn how to use dating apps. Yes, you heard that right. At 58, Margaret decided she wanted to date again. But the real transformation happened when Margaret's book club decided to stop just talking about their dreams and start living them. Joyce opened a dance studio in her garage and started teaching salsa to other women over 50. Helen published her first romance novel, and it became a local bestseller. Linda moved to Italy. She sent postcards every week. And Margaret started a blog called Predictably Unpredictable, where she documented her journey of reinventing herself after 50. Within 6 months, she had 50,000 followers. Women from all over the world wrote to her, telling her their own stories of starting over, of refusing to be invisible, of choosing joy over bitterness.
Now, I know what you want to know. Did Margaret find love again? Did she get her happily ever after? Well, she did find love, but not in the way you might think. 8 months after Robert left, Margaret was at the grocery store when she ran into David, a man she'd known peripherally for years. He was recently widowed, and they struck up a conversation in the produce section about the best way to choose avocados. But here's the beautiful part. Margaret wasn't looking for someone to complete her. She had learned that she was already complete. David wasn't her salvation. He was her companion on the journey. They started as friends. They went to museums together, took cooking classes, traveled to places Margaret had always wanted to see. When romance bloomed between them, it was based on who they were now, not who they used to be or who they thought they should be. As for Robert, he reached out to Margaret about 6 months after he left, wanting to reconcile. He'd realized what he'd lost, he said. Jessica had left him, and he was alone. Margaret listened to him on the phone for exactly 3 minutes. Then she said something that still gives me chills. "Robert, for 28 years, I made myself smaller so you could feel bigger. I will never do that again. I wish you well, but I'm not your safety net anymore." And she hung up. Today, Margaret is 59. She lives in a smaller house that she decorated exactly how she wants it. Her garden is more beautiful than ever because she tends it for her own joy, not to impress the neighbors. Jessica had her baby, a little girl named Hope, and Margaret is honorary grandmother, and yes, she spoils that little girl rotten. Margaret's blog has grown into a full-time business. She speaks at conferences, helps other women navigate divorce and reinvention, and has written a book that comes out next year. But you know what the most beautiful part of the story is? Margaret told me that she wouldn't change what happened. Not the betrayal, not the phone call, not the pain of discovering that her marriage was a lie. Because that phone call didn't destroy her life, it saved it. She was dying slowly, becoming invisible day by day. Robert's betrayal didn't break her, it woke her up.
So why am I telling you Margaret's story? Because maybe you needed to hear it today. Maybe you're in your own version of Margaret's before life. Maybe you've been making yourself smaller so someone else can feel bigger. Maybe you've forgotten who you are underneath all the roles you play. Or maybe you're in your own after moment, dealing with betrayal, divorce, loss, or just the realization that the life you built isn't the life you want anymore. Margaret wants you to know this. It's never too late to choose yourself. It's never too late to stop being predictable and start being authentic. It's never too late to turn toward the light. Whether you're 40 or 70 or anywhere in between, your story isn't over. In fact, the best chapters might be still ahead. If Margaret's story touched you, please give this video a like and subscribe to hear more real-life stories of courage, transformation, and hope. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And remember, you are not too old, it's not too late, and you are definitely not predictable. You are a woman with a story worth telling and a life worth living fully. Thank you for listening to Margaret's story. I'll see you next time.